Friend, Shabbat Shalom. It's an honor to be with you this evening, to be able to share some words of Torah. More Jewish children's books have been written about the story of Noah and the flood than any other topic. Here is one example from our synagogue library. There are dozens of more, and if you go on Amazon and do a search for Noah and the flood, endless. People must be writing them one a week. There's a whole industry, Nathan, of Noah's Ark books. This is what you've learned at the New Reformed Temple. All the books are a variation on these facts. God becomes displeased with the world that he has created. He will bring a flood and destroy the world. However, Noah finds favor with the Lord and is called upon to build an ark. Male and female of all animal kingdom are gathered and placed in the ark. Noah and his wife, his sons and their wives go into the ark. It rains for 40 days and 40 nights. The rain stops. The water slowly recedes. A dove goes out and brings back an olive branch. The land is finally dry. And Noah and his family leave the ark to begin again. God makes a commitment never to bring another flood, and the rainbow is a sign of that. Every children's story is a variation on that. It's a nice story. And superficially, you can convince the children that Noah was a nice man who loved animals and saved the world. If that is what we get out of the story, we are missing something quite important. Here is what the Torah actually says. The earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with lawlessness. And when God saw how corrupt the earth was, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on earth, God said to Noah, I've decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. I'm about to destroy them with earth. And then we get the instructions about how to build the ark and what to put in it. And what does the Torah tell us about Noah's response? Noah did just as God commanded him, so he did. We expect more from Noah, shouldn't we? The world was about to be destroyed. Noah is silent. You would expect him to say something like, God, why do you choose me? I'm not without sin. I am happy that you are saving my family and me, but I do not want to be saved if others are not. There are some righteous people that are worthy of being saved besides us. God, allow the people to repent. Don't murder them. Some reaction, some response, some concern beyond himself. But that doesn't happen. Noah has no reaction to this devastating news. Noah's indifference so enraged the rabbis of later generations that the authors of the Zohar, which is the primary text of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism, created a dialogue that they believe should have been included in the biblical text. After the flood was over and Noah had released all the animals, he and his family stood on dry ground. And this is what the Zohar says should have happened or could have happened or any way you describe it. And I quote, surveying the devastation, Noah asked, God, how could you have done this? How could you have allowed all of humanity to be swept away by this flood? God thundered back, fool, I described at length what I planned to do before the flood, so that you might ask mercy of the world. But as soon as you heard that you would be safe in the ark, the evil of the world didn't touch your heart. You built the ark and saved yourself. Now that the world has been destroyed, you ask questions and offer pleas. Where was your compassion and pity when it could have made a difference? Noah, you are too late. What a response by God, but God understands the moral inadequacy of Noah. Noah's sin is a sin of indifference, of turning the other way. Elie Wiesel spoke in the White House in 1999 in anticipation of the new millennium in a message, a speech, which was entitled Perils of Indifference. And let me quote to you an amazing paragraph where Elie Wiesel pulls this all together. Of course, indifference can be tempting. More than that, seductive. It is so much easier to look away from victims. It is so much easier to avoid such rude interruptions to our work, our dreams, our hopes. It is, after all, awkward, troublesome to be involved in another person's pain and despair. Yet for the person who is indifferent, his or her neighbor are of no consequence, and therefore their lives are meaningless. Their hidden or visible anguish is of no interest. Indifference reduces the other to an abstraction. It's worth going online and hearing the entire message of Elie Wiesel. It is quite powerful. Noah's story bids us to think about our own lives and reactions. Do we just sit idly by and wait until it's too late to take any action? Do we say, what difference can I make? Or do we spring into action? That's a question we confront every day of our lives. Think about the great indifference of this past week. What is our reaction to the fact that lawyers appointed by a federal judge to identify migrant families who were separated by the Trump administration say that they have not yet tracked down the parents of 545 children, and that about 2/3 of those parents were deported to Central America without their children? And when you read about that, children were literally pulled away from their mother's breast. How do we respond that our government might have made 545 innocent children orphans? There are no mass demonstrations in Washington in reaction to this moral abomination. This is our sin of indifference that the story of Noah reveals. What do we do when we're confronted with evil? Do we look at it? Do we address it? Or do we find a way to rationalize our concern by some form of indifference? Now, how do we confront that flaw in ourselves? And all of us have it. I think by being guided by the values of our tradition, a value system that commands us to care for others as much as we care about ourselves, a value system that demands from us the love of the stranger, a value system that says that we are responsible for the widow, the orphan, the poor who dwell in our midst, a value system that insists that we set up courts of law that do not discriminate between the rich and poor, the stranger and the homeborn, a value system that declares without hesitation to each and every one of us, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice, you shall pursue. Martin Luther King Jr., in his letter from the Birmingham jail, wrote, "In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be." This is the interrelated structure of reality. May our religious tradition, on this Shabbat, challenge us to this high standard of what it means to be a human being. Shabbat Shalom.